Olivia had played this scene in her mind 100 times, but nothing could have prepared her for how it unfolded. The polished marble floors of Cole Holdings gleamed beneath her feet as she stood in front of the towering glass windows, clutching a single photo in her trembling hand. Behind the massive desk sat Daniel Cole, a man of power and precision, flipping through reports as if her very presence was a minor inconvenience. Her throat tightened as she whispered his name, barely audible, and when his eyes finally lifted to meet hers, she felt the familiar sting of hope and fear tangled together. She took a shaky breath, pulled the small ultrasound picture from her pocket, and placed it on the corner of his desk. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice breaking halfway through. The words seemed to echo in the silence, filling every corner of the pristine office. For a moment there was no reaction, only the faint hum of the city outside. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression so unreadable it made her heart ache. Then, with a calmness that cut sharper than any rage could, he said, "I will never marry you." No rise in tone, no trace of emotion, just finality. Olivia felt her breath vanish, the floor beneath her shifting like sand. Every memory of late-night promises, whispered dreams, and fleeting laughter crumbled in that instant. She wanted to scream, to beg him to remember what they once were, but something inside her froze. She stood taller, her chin lifted, refusing to let him see her break. Without another word, she turned toward the door, her fingers clenched so tightly around the ultrasound that her nails dug into her palm. The elevator doors closed, sealing her away from him forever, and though her vision blurred with tears, a spark of determination flickered in her chest. She wasn't just walking away from him, she was walking toward a new life, one she would fight to protect. The small apartment Olivia found in the quiet town was nothing like the glittering city skyline she once called home, yet it carried a kind of peace she had never known. Gone were the cold boardrooms and polished floors, replaced with creaking wooden steps, neighbors who greeted her with warm smiles, and the gentle sound of rain tapping against her window at night. She had arrived with little more than a suitcase, a heart full of hurt, and the promise of the tiny life growing inside her. At first the silence was overwhelming, a constant reminder of how truly alone she was. Yet as the days stretched into weeks, Olivia discovered a strength she never imagined she had. Each morning as she looked at her reflection, she whispered to herself, "You are enough. For you, and for the child you carry." Those words became her shield against the loneliness. Her pregnancy was not easy. There were nights when she sat curled on her bed, tears falling as she wondered how she would manage doctors' bills and groceries. There were mornings when exhaustion made it nearly impossible to rise, but she forced herself to go to work at a small bookstore on the corner of town. The owner, an elderly woman named Grace, treated Olivia like a daughter, often slipping her extra food or insisting she rest when her feet swelled. Slowly, Olivia built a quiet rhythm, working by day, preparing a nursery by night, and finding little pieces of joy in things she once overlooked. And when the day finally came, after hours of pain and courage, she held not just one miracle, but two. Twin girls with the same piercing blue eyes as the man who had once turned away. In that moment, Olivia knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer alone. She was a mother, and that was a title she would wear with pride. The years passed like pages in a book, each chapter filled with both hardship and joy as Olivia raised her daughters in that small town. The twins, Lily and Emma, grew into bright, curious girls who carried the same sparkle in their eyes but very different personalities, one bold and adventurous, the other gentle and thoughtful. They became Olivia's reason to keep moving forward, her anchor on the days when she felt the weight of the world pressing down. The bookstore job turned into something more than work. It became a place where she found community, laughter, and even purpose. Customers adored her kindness, and Grace often told her she had a gift for bringing light into people's lives. Yet despite the happiness she built, there was always a quiet ache in Olivia's heart, a shadow of the man who had once promised the world but left her to walk it alone. Fate, however, has its own way of weaving paths together. While Olivia's life was blossoming in quiet corners, Daniel's was climbing in the ruthless world of business. He had become a man celebrated in headlines, his empire expanding with every deal. Yet behind the success was a hollow emptiness he refused to admit. Nights in lavish penthouses felt cold, his victories short-lived. The world saw a powerful figure, but inside he carried a restlessness he could not explain. He had silenced thoughts of Olivia long ago, convincing himself she was part of a past he'd buried. But destiny was patient, and it waited until the moment he least expected it. Because in the same hospital where he once signed contracts and closed deals, life would soon confront him with the truth he had run from, the truth he had fathered 2 daughters he had never known. It happened on a night Olivia would never forget. Lily had been running a fever for days, and despite every remedy, the little girl's condition only worsened. Panic tightened Olivia's chest as she rushed her daughters to the city hospital, clutching Lily's small hand, while Emma trailed close behind. The sterile smell of disinfectant, the soft beeping of machines, and the hurried footsteps of nurses created a storm around her. Yet she stood firm, whispering comfort into her daughter's ear. Hours felt like days as she waited for the doctor's update, praying for strength she wasn't sure she had left. In those long moments, she couldn't help but wonder if she had truly given her children enough. Still, even through fear, her love never wavered. She promised herself she would never let them see her break, no matter how heavy the burden. What Olivia didn't know was that destiny had already begun weaving a plan. In another wing of that very hospital, Daniel Cole was making a late-night visit to a business partner recovering from surgery. Dressed in his tailored suit, carrying the aura of command, he moved through the corridors with the same calm authority that once dismissed Olivia. But as he turned a corner, his world shifted in an instant. There she was, Olivia, standing outside a children's ward, her hair pulled back, exhaustion etched across her face, but her posture as strong and proud as ever. At her side were 2 little girls, one asleep against her shoulder, the other clutching her hand with innocent trust. Daniel's steps faltered. His breath caught. He felt his heart pound in a way it hadn't in years. Something inside him whispered that this was no ordinary encounter. The past he had tried to bury was standing in front of him, alive, breathing, and more powerful than ever. And when his gaze dropped to the twins, recognition struck like a lightning bolt. Eyes he knew too well stared back at him. Daniel froze in the hallway, his polished shoes rooted to the floor as his world tilted on its axis. He could have dismissed the resemblance as coincidence, but the truth glared at him with undeniable force. The children were his. The curve of their faces, the shade of their eyes, Even the stubborn tilt of their chins mirrored his own reflection. For a man who once prided himself on control, he suddenly felt powerless. Memories he had locked away rushed back. The look in Olivia's eyes the day she stood in his office, the ultrasound photo she had placed on his desk, the words he had spoken so carelessly. "I will never marry you." They now echoed in his mind with crushing weight. His chest tightened as realization clawed at him. He had not just abandoned a woman, he had abandoned a family. Olivia, sensing a gaze upon her, turned. The sight of Daniel standing there nearly knocked the air from her lungs. For years she had imagined this moment, sometimes in anger, sometimes in sorrow, but never with the calm steadiness that washed over her now. Her first instinct was to protect her daughters, to shield them from a man who had once turned his back. But before she could speak, Lily stirred weakly in her arms, her fevered face drawing Olivia's attention back to the child who needed her most. The doctor appeared, calling Olivia's name, and she hurried inside without another word, leaving Daniel in the hallway, torn between pride and the sudden, overwhelming ache of regret. For the first time in his life, Daniel Cole felt like a man stripped of power, facing a truth he could not negotiate or escape. And as he watched the door close, a whisper inside told him he was standing at the threshold of a second chance, one he might never deserve, but one he could no longer ignore. The hours stretched endlessly that night as Daniel lingered outside the ward, pacing the sterile corridor with a turmoil he could not hide. Every sound of hurried footsteps, every flicker of the monitor's light through the small glass window kept his heart on edge. He had faced hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and financial storms that would crush most men, but nothing compared to the fear of losing the little girl he now knew was his daughter. His mind replayed the cruel finality of his past words, the day he had sent Olivia away with nothing but brokenness. He had believed himself untouchable then, too focused on power to understand the cost of pride. Now, as he stood on the other side of the door, hearing faint cries and soft voices, he realized the empire he built meant nothing compared to the fragile lives inside that room. When the doctor finally emerged, Daniel's breath caught. The news was steady but heavy. Lily was stable, yet her condition required care and rest. Relief flooded him, so intense that his knees nearly buckled. He turned toward the door, desperate to go in, but hesitation gripped him. Would Olivia even allow it? Would those little girls, his daughters, accept him after all these years? Inside, Olivia sat by the hospital bed stroking Lily's hair, while Emma clung to her side. She looked weary, yet her strength radiated like a quiet flame. Daniel watched through the small window, his reflection overlapping with theirs, and something in him broke. He knew the time for pride was gone. He had lost years he could never reclaim. But perhaps destiny had not brought him here to remember. It had brought him here to change. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to open the door, not as the man of wealth and power the world admired, but as a father desperate for redemption, and a man finally willing to face the love he had once thrown away.